Wife's awful boss crashed our party, mocked our home, then claimed she slept her way up, so I threw him out myself. It started with him standing in the living room, holding a glass of wine he had just called cheap and sour, looking around at the furniture and decorations as if they were garbage. The irritation built up fast, and it took effort to keep calm. He turned to my wife, his eyes narrowing, and said something so offensive it burned into memory. Never had the thought crossed my mind that someone would need to be physically removed from the house, but that night changed everything. The party had been in the works for weeks. It was meant to be a relaxed gathering, just close friends, a few of her coworkers, and some neighbors. Nothing extravagant, just a chance to unwind. My wife mentioned inviting her boss, not because she wanted to, but because it felt like the polite thing to do. She had recently been promoted, and she worried about seeming ungrateful if she didn't extend the invitation. She described him as someone who always acted superior, constantly putting people down at work, but she felt obligated. The idea didn't sit well, but it was her call, so the invitation went out. When he showed up, it was clear he didn't belong. He walked through the front door, barely acknowledging anyone, and immediately started commenting on the house. He asked if it was the smallest one in the neighborhood, his tone dripping with condescension. The food on the table caught his attention next, and he made a point to say it looked like something from a budget catering service. Guests exchanged glances, but no one responded. My wife stayed quiet, her face tight, trying to keep the mood light. The hope was he'd get bored, have a drink, and leave early. He didn't leave. Instead, he made himself comfortable, walking through the house like he was conducting an inspection. The walls, painted a neutral color, were apparently too dull for him. He said they made the place feel lifeless. The framed prints on the walls, pieces we picked out together over the years, were dismissed as tacky. He laughed at his own comments, oblivious to the silence around him. The room felt smaller with every word he spoke, the air heavier. His attention shifted to my wife. It started small, with remarks about her work ethic, how she was always so driven. The words sounded like compliments, but the way he said them carried a different meaning. He brought up her promotion, emphasizing how fast it happened, his voice implying something unspoken. When she introduced him to an old friend from college, he made a comment about her past, hinting at reckless behavior that didn't exist. It was clear he was trying to embarrass her. The tension was unbearable by then. My wife pulled me aside in the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly. She didn't want him in the house anymore. The party was supposed to be a break from stress, not a stage for his insults. Agreeing to handle it, the decision was made to ask him to leave. Returning to the living room, he was still there, leaning against the fireplace, telling a story to a group of uncomfortable guests. His voice carried, and he made another comment about my wife's promotion, suggesting she hadn't earned it through work. That was the breaking point. The glass in my hand hit the floor, and before thinking, his collar was in my grip. He stumbled as he was pulled toward the door, his arms flailing for balance. The front door swung open, and he was pushed outside, landing on the grass. The house went silent. He stood up, brushing off his jacket, and said there would be consequences. The response was simple: never speak to or about my wife again. He walked away, muttering threats under his breath. The aftermath was heavy. Guests started leaving, some quietly, others offering quick words of support. My wife stood by the door, her expression a mix of shock and relief. No words passed between us for a while. Later, she said it was the first time she felt defended against someone from her workplace, even if it happened at home. The next morning, she drafted her resignation letter, unwilling to stay in a job where someone like him held power. The incident lingered. It wasn't just about that night, it was about her dealing with his behavior for months, maybe years, and never feeling like she could push back. Throwing him out didn't fix everything, but it was a start. She deserved better, and so did we. The planning of the party had taken up most of our free time for weeks. It was meant to be a simple get-together, nothing over the top, just a chance to bring people we cared about into our home. The guest list included our closest friends, a couple of neighbors we'd grown tight with, and a few of my wife's coworkers she actually liked. The idea was to keep it low-key, with good food, music, and a relaxed vibe. We spent days cleaning the house, picking out a playlist, and making sure there was enough seating for everyone. My wife handled most of the food, cooking some dishes herself and ordering others to save time. Everything was set for a night we could both enjoy. The decision to invite her boss came up late in the process. My wife brought it up one evening while we were setting out plates. She didn't want him there, not really, but she felt like she had to ask. Her promotion had just been announced, and she was still navigating the new role. She explained that her boss had a reputation at work for being difficult, someone who always needed to be the smartest person in the room. Not inviting him might look like a snub, especially since other coworkers were coming. The thought of him in our house didn't sit right, but she said it was just one night, and he probably wouldn't even show up. Reluctantly, the invitation was sent, and we moved on with the planning, hoping it wouldn't matter. The night of the party started off well. Guests arrived on time, filling the house with chatter and laughter. The food was laid out on the dining table, and the playlist hummed in the background. My wife moved through the crowd, greeting people, making sure everyone had a drink. She looked happy, relieved to have a night away from work stress. Friends complimented the house, the spread, the vibe. Everything was going as planned. Then her boss walked in. He didn't knock, just pushed the door open and stepped inside, his suit jacket slung over one shoulder. He scanned the room, his expression flat, like he was already unimpressed. My wife's smile faltered for a second, but she recovered, introducing him to a few people nearby. He barely nodded, his attention already elsewhere. His presence shifted the mood. He didn't mingle like the other guests. Instead, he stood near the center of the living room, holding a glass of wine he'd poured himself, and started picking apart the house. He commented on the size first, asking if we'd chosen the smallest lot in the neighborhood to save money. The question hung in the air, and no one answered. He moved on to the food, poking at a tray of appetizers and saying they looked like something from a gas station. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some trying to change the subject, others just staring at their plates. My wife stayed busy, refilling drinks and checking on the kitchen, avoiding him as much as she could. The hope was he'd say his piece, get bored, and leave. But he stayed, his voice cutting through the hum of conversation every time he opened his mouth. He didn't stop at the house or the food. He started walking through the rooms, glass in hand, like he was appraising the place for a sale. He stopped in front of the living room walls, painted a soft gray we'd chosen after weeks of debating colors, and said they made the space feel like an office waiting room. He pointed at a framed photo from our honeymoon, hanging above the couch, and said it looked like something from a cheap hotel lobby. The comments kept coming, each one sharper, as he moved to the dining area and criticized the table for being too small to host a real party. No one laughed at his remarks, but he didn't seem to notice, chuckling to himself as he sipped his wine. The other guests stayed quiet, some pretending to be busy with their plates, others just watching him. My wife kept her distance, focusing on small tasks like rearranging napkins or checking the music, but her shoulders were tense, and her movements were quick, like she was trying to outrun his words. His focus turned to my wife, and the shift was unmistakable. He started with comments about her job, calling her ambitious in a way that sounded like an accusation. He mentioned her promotion again, pointing out how young she was to have climbed so high, his tone heavy with implication. When she brought over a friend from her college days to introduce, he cut in, asking if this was the friend she used to party with, as if her past was some scandal he knew about. The room grew quieter, guests picking up on the edge in his voice. My wife's face stayed composed, but her hands fidgeted with a napkin, folding and unfolding it. She excused herself to check on something in the kitchen, leaving him standing there, smirking at his own comment. The air felt thick, like everyone was waiting for what he'd say next. The breaking point came soon after. I followed my wife to the kitchen, where she stood by the counter, gripping the edge. She didn't look at me, just said she couldn't stand him being in our house anymore. His comments weren't just rude, they were personal, and they were humiliating her in front of her friends and coworkers. She asked if we could get him to leave without making a scene. I nodded, promising to handle it, and walked back to the living room. He was still there, leaning against the fireplace, telling a story about work that ended with another jab at my wife's promotion. He said she must have had some special charm to move up so fast. The words hit like a punch. Without thinking, my glass dropped, and I grabbed his collar, pulling him toward the door. He stumbled, his wine splashing, but I didn't stop until he was outside. He landed on the lawn, his jacket wrinkled, wine glass still clutched in his hand. The front door stayed open behind me, framing the silent house. He stood up, brushing grass off his pants, and tried to regain his composure. His face was red, eyes wide with shock, but he managed to straighten his tie and point a finger at me. He said I'd regret touching him, that this wasn't over. I stepped closer, telling him never to speak to my wife or about her again. My voice was steady, louder than intended. He backed up, muttering something about consequences, then turned and walked down the street toward his car. The sound of his footsteps faded, and I shut the door. Inside, the guests stood frozen, some holding plates, others staring at the floor. My wife was near the staircase, her arms crossed, watching me with a mix of relief and worry. The party unraveled quickly after that. Guests started gathering their things, some leaving without a word, others offering quiet support. A friend from the neighborhood squeezed my shoulder and said I did the right thing. One of my wife's coworkers whispered to her that she'd always hated the guy. The house emptied out, leaving just the two of us amid half-eaten plates and scattered cups. We didn't clean up right away. My wife sat on the couch, staring at the wall, and I sat beside her. She didn't speak for a long time. When she did, she said she never felt so humiliated, but also that seeing me stand up to him was the first time she felt protected from someone at work. The next morning, she opened her laptop and wrote her resignation letter. She didn't want to stay in a place where someone like him had power over her. The incident wasn't just about that night, it was about months of his belittling comments, his constant undermining, and her feeling trapped. Throwing him out didn't erase the past, but it gave her a way forward. We didn't regret it, even if it meant starting over.